Hi, Bruce. Please tell us a little bit about your life, about your work experience. We know that you started in a computer business, but you have a really specific story. Please tell us.
Well, yes, I started working on computers which were really analog computers. They were mechanical devices which consisted of levers and gears and all sorts of mechanical components which had the ability to be able to add and subtract and keep a record of the data that was being processed. So these machines were used for doing things like in accounting, the debtor's ledger, creditor's ledger, and various other bookkeeping tasks like salaries and wages, and also things like stock control. So these machines required an operator who understood bookkeeping, and they would input all of the information into the machine, and the machine would print all of the information out onto sheets which were known as backing sheets, which was a record of all of the information that had been entered. And it also produced things like the statements and the invoices and so on, which were then sent out to the customers. So yes, initially these machines required a lot of human input, where you had to have operators which were fairly conversant with bookkeeping, and basically they ran the business, and they were providing information which went through to the company's accountant, and then from the accountant it would go through to management, so that they would know what was happening on a day-to-day basis, and more importantly what was happening within the company from month to month. And so yes, these machines were mechanically very complex, and they required a lot of maintenance. You had to service them regularly and keep them in a fairly clean environment, because you had a lot of components which were quite delicate, rather like watches and clocks. You couldn't have them operating in a dirty environment. It had to be a clean environment. But then, of course, prior to me working on these machines, during the Second World War, the American and British governments were working on code-breaking machines. And these code-breaking machines ended up by becoming incorporated into business operations by companies like IBM and RCL. IBM was an American company, RCL was a British company, and there was another company called Hollerith. They were working on electromechanical devices using punch cards as input. So where previously you had operators working on accounting machines, now they were working on data capturing machines, where they were printing information or punching information onto punch cards, and then those punch cards would be collated and entered into the computer's memory. So what was happening was that the work that was previously done by human beings sitting at a machine was now being done by the very early computers. And of course, it didn't take long for the development of more and more advanced machines. Initially, they were very, very big and required a lot of electrical power to um, to keep the machines running. And they used to generate a huge amount of heat as well. But gradually, technology, the electronics technology developed, and they moved away from valves, which were used as the main electronic components to operate the machine. They moved away into the transistorized era because transistors had suddenly become developed, and transistor was basically able to do what a valve could do, but they were 100 times smaller than a valve and hundreds of times faster, which meant that all of a sudden, with the development of transistors, they were able to build circuits which could do the same work as the earlier computers, but using very, very small components. And these components worked at very, very high speeds. So that changed the whole perspective of computing, because now all of a sudden you had machines which were able to be programmed to do all of these accounting tasks at very, very high speeds. And instead of having huge rooms full of young women, because it was women that were the operators of the earlier machines, instead of having hundreds of women working on these machines, producing vast amounts of information for big companies, you now had one big machine that was doing the job of hundreds of people. And they were doing, the computers, of course, they learnt to write programs which enabled these machines to do more and more complex calculations. And the computer industry all of a sudden changed dramatically. So
which year is that?
That would have been in the 1950s. That was before I started to work on computers as such. But then towards the end of the 1950s and early 1960s, transistorized computers were becoming very common in government departments, banks, building societies, municipalities, and all big companies that had to do a lot of data processing. And so it just developed from there, and the machines, they became more and more powerful and operated at very, very high speeds to produce huge amounts of information. And but then there was another change, and that was when they all of a sudden started to develop integrated circuits. Integrated circuits were little chips which were made up, which consisted of thousands of transistors built into an integrated circuit. And these ICs had the ability to do all sorts of functions, like some of these ICs could do addition and subtraction and all sorts of calculations. And the whole scene suddenly changed, because integrated circuits meant that the size of computers was reduced considerably, and of course the amount of power that they consumed was also reduced a lot. Anyway, initially these circuit boards were very, very big, but then of course the integrated circuits gradually became smaller and smaller, and they operated at much, much higher speeds. Also, of course, the computers were being developed in such a way that they could be programmed to do all sorts of other things other than just ordinary accounting procedures. And so it ended up where computers had large numbers of circuit boards built into them, where they were able to actually run programs. And these programs were able to do all sorts of tasks. And then by the 1980s, well, not 1970s actually, there were a couple of companies that started to produce mini computers. And this was the start of the era of the mini computer, which is the personal computer which we now have today in the form of laptops and desktop computers. So the whole computer era expanded exponentially, and it got to the stage where computing power of computers almost doubled every 18 months from about the 1980s up until the present day. And something like a modern iWatch, Apple iWatch, has probably the same amount of computing power as a computer of the 1960s, which probably weighed about 15 or 20 tons. So yes, I've seen a huge change in the computer industry, and it's been a fascinating business to be involved with. But it's got to the stage now where most people don't even know how the computers work, because it's now out of our control. The modern computers now are being designed by the computers themselves, and intelligence, this artificial intelligence is enabling computers to actually generate computer software and do all of the coding which is now used inside the computers. Whereas in the 1950s and 1960s, it took large teams of people working together for months and months to develop a program to do a fairly simple, task.
That's true. It's amazing, fascinating stories. So, to me, it's interesting to know that all the computing started because, correct me if I'm right, they wanted to help the accounting system to work easier and faster, yeah?
Yes.
That's how it all started.
Yes.